So with the Oscars happening within the next couple days, I figured I would go back and rewatch all of this year's Best Picture nominees, including watching some for the very first time that I didn't get to see because I live in a town where most of these movies do not come out until, right around the time the Oscars happen. So this is my ranking of this year's Best Picture nominees from the worst to the best. And honestly, I gotta say, all of these Best Picture nominees, I think this is like the first time in a few years where it's like, all of these I think are worth watching. But that being said, though, that doesn't mean all of them are Best Picture worthy. Maybe the top five, or maybe top six, maybe, but maybe not all of them, unfortunately. I still recommend watching them, but maybe I don't think of them as Best Picture material. So why don't we get right into it? Here's my ranking list of the Best Picture nominees for this year, from worst to the best. Let's get into it. At number 10, Elvis. Elvis has a few good things going for it. Austin Butler's performance is incredible. There are times where I didn't see an actor playing Elvis. I kind of just saw Elvis. The visual style of this movie works. Usually I'm not a fan of Baz Luhrmann's style, but here it actually does kind of work. It kind of matches the energy and the sensation that was Elvis Presley. I do think that works. And I do like that they kind of treat Elvis as a human being, because he kind of became like this caricature. He kind of became this joke over these years, and it's unfortunate, but you can definitely tell his influence and such. What doesn't really work in this movie is, well, first off, they kind of gloss over some things from Elvis's life that are a little problematic, and two, Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks is terrible in this movie. Oh man, he is so hammy. He is so over the top. He is a Baz Luhrmann movie villain, basically. He's basically playing the villain from Moulin Rouge. And it's ridiculous. It's over the top. It doesn't match this movie whatsoever. And the fact that he is narrating this entire movie is annoying. And also, it doesn't really make sense when things happen in Elvis's life that Tom Parker's not even a part of. So how does he know that this happened? It just doesn't really make any sense. So I just feel like if any other actor would have worked, love Tom Hanks, but that was just a terrible performance. At number 9, Avatar: The Way of Water. This movie hit 13 years in the making, and it's finally here, and it somehow still got nominated for Best Picture. Now, the movie is visually stunning, and I do think some of the performances are pretty good. I did like the main character in this one, the younger son of Jake and Neytiri in this movie. I thought he did a good job. I did like how they kind of brought back the villain. I thought that was kind of interesting. I also like the new element sorts that they're looking for in this movie. The main villains are looking for in this movie. I thought that was also very interesting. But kind of like Unobtainium, it wasn't really developed, but oh well. But here, also, I don't really like some things in this movie. Like, it's 3 hours long in that James Cameron way where any movie has to be stretched out to an hour longer than it probably should be. Also, even though I didn't mind the sidelining of Jake in this movie, didn't really care for the sidelining of Neytiri in this movie. I thought she could have done a lot more in this movie. And also, I kind of had mixed feelings about the whole Navi Jesus, the teen girl that was adopted by them, played by Sigourney Weaver of all people. I didn't really buy into it, and it just kind of felt like it was just setting up Avatar 3 more than anything else. It didn't always work for me. I do think it is worth watching. It's on big screen, especially that final act, but it's definitely, I call it a chore would be too strong of a word, but it's entertaining. The visuals are incredible, but Best Picture worthy? Nah, I don't think so. At number 8, Women Talking. This is one of the 2 movies that I didn't get a chance to watch until it was nominated for Best Picture. So Women Talking is about, well, women talking. The actresses do a great job in the movie. Jessie Buckley, Claire Foy, Rooney Mara, Frances McDormand, and also Ben Whishaw also really does a good job in the movie as the main male figure in this movie. There are some interesting moral questions in this movie, and I do like the way that this movie's shot. It's kind of shot like a black and white movie, but it's not really a black and white movie. It was pretty interesting. But it's also not an easy movie to sit through. It kind of, I don't want to say it reminded me too much of She Said. She Said was an interesting movie, but not a movie I can like go back and like rewatch over and over again. But this movie, it's an important movie to watch. And I do think it is worth watching. It's powerful, it is important, but not a movie that I can like go back and be like, yeah, I feel like I'm in the mood to watch this, unfortunately. At number 7, All Quiet on the Western Front. This is a movie that does a lot of things really well. The cinematography is great. The acting's great. The visuals are incredible. The score is great. The only downside is that I feel like I've been seeing this movie ever since high school. I feel like this would be a movie that I would watch in high school if I was learning about World War One. Because you got a lot of things in this movie that you kind of learned about in World War One. The trenches, the tanks, the gas masks and everything like that. It's all here. And it kind of just to me, it just didn't really do much for the screenplay where it was like very different enough, or didn't really do too much with the cinematography that made me go, this movie's, incredible. Like with 1917, the story in that movie's not so great, but I was so impressed with that movie because of how they made it look like it was one long shot throughout the entire movie. All Quiet on the Western Front doesn't really have that. It almost feels like a textbook movie at times, where it's like, okay, here's what we learned in World War One, and here it is in this movie. It's still really powerful at times, but I just feel like there are better movies that kind of tackled the same message before. At number 6 is Tar. Cate Blanchett, it absolutely destroys this movie. She is incredible in this movie. She is powerful. She's one of my favorite actresses working in the industry in general right now. And I do think she does a really good job in this movie. I love the sound design of this movie too. I love the cinematography, particularly this 10-minute long take where she's basically making fun of the students without really like directly saying it. I do think that is very interesting. It kind of says a lot about her, says a lot about her character. That is really well done. And I do think, kind of like with Women Talking, there are a lot of interesting questions about this movie that it asks about how we view ourselves, about how, people think of them as like gods and something like that. I do think that is very fascinating, but I also don't know if I can really watch this too much because, first off, the movie is almost 3 hours long. Well, like between 2.5 hours and 3 hours. And you can definitely feel the pacing at times. And it just doesn't always, I don't want to say it doesn't always work, but it's definitely one of those movies that if you ever take a film analysis class, this movie will definitely be mentioned at some point. So at least it has that. At number 5 is Triangle of Sadness. This was the other movie that I didn't get a chance to watch before the nominations. And this movie was crazy. This movie, I think the first 2 acts were great. The third act was pretty good, but I kind of had some mixed feelings about the ending. Like, the first act, I was laughing. When they were on the cruise ship, it was pretty fun. It was pretty exciting to see. When they were on the island for a bit, that was really interesting. And I do think the performances are pretty good, particularly from Dale De Leon, Harris Dickinson, and Charles B. Dean. I do think all those performances are really good. I do think its commentary is pretty interesting, where, yes, it's a movie where it makes fun of rich people, it makes fun of how rich people treat poor people, but at the same time, it kind of makes fun of the idea of power, because, by the end, Dale De Leon, who was this maid on this cruise ship, she's the only one who knows how to survive on this island, so they kind of look to her, and she kind of gets all this power now. And I do think that is very interesting. It's like, what would you do if you were in charge? Like, what would you do with all that energy? Like, what would you do? And I do think the movie does, it's less a criticism of the nature of, wealth, but more of the nature of power. And I think that's where the movie is really strong. I would say that the movie is definitely too long. It's 2.5 hours long. I feel like it could have tightened things up a bit, maybe at 2 hours. The actual cruise, like when it actually just starts falling apart, that was really fun to watch. And also, I didn't really care for the ending too much. I did like the whole ending with Dale De Leon and Charles B. Dean, but not so much the Harris Dickinson part. I wish that wasn't so ambiguous. I feel like they could have done things a little bit better with his character at the end, but I still think it's worth watching. At number 4, The Banshees of Inisherin. Now, the 4 lead performances in this movie, Colin Farrell, Brendan Gleeson, Barry Keoghan, and Carrie Condon, they're all great in this movie. The cinematography is absolutely gorgeous. The score is really good as well. I do like how the characters kind of cross paths in various ways, like how Colin Farrell starts off being nice, but then by the end he's being resentful, where at the beginning of the movie Brendan Gleeson's resentful, but he winds up being nice at the end of the movie. I usually kind of like movies that do that. And this movie does it well. It's definitely not a fun movie, but it's definitely at times where I was laughing, but I was also kind of wanted to cry a bit. It also kind of made me think about my life, what I'm doing with my life, what my time, like how I interact with people. I do think that is very interesting. I do think it is worth a watch at some point. At number 3 is The Fabelmans. Now, this movie, rewatching it again, I actually think I may appreciate it a little bit more. Still love the performances of Michelle Williams and Paul Dano. The other actors do a pretty good job, like Gabriel LaBelle as pretty much young Steven Spielberg, Seth Rogen, even David Lynch in his brief performance at the end. Judd Hirsch does a really good job for his one scene. I do like a lot of the quiet moments in this movie where it kind of just shows basically the power of film and like how we react to film. And I do think that's really well done, from when Sammy watches The Greatest Show on Earth for the first time to when he discovers a secret about his family. to when his mother discovers that he knows the secret. I do think that is all really well done. It's a really interesting movie and definitely a very interesting look into the life of Steven Spielberg. And I do think this seemed like a very therapeutic movie to him. I don't want to go into his psyche too much, but it seems like we've gone into his life too much with this movie. I do think it's interesting, and also how it kind of shows, like, at some point we kind of just look at our parents, not as our parents, but as like people who are flawed as we grow older. I do think that's also very interesting. I still have mixed feelings about the ending, though. I get it, that's like a meta joke and all that, and it's aware that's a movie, but personally for me, I still feel like it just didn't need to be in there. Like, him talking to, John Ford at the end, that's all cool. Just the part afterwards, it just kind of didn't really make sense considering the rest of the movie that we just watched. But I do recommend this, especially if you're interested in Spielberg and maybe are interested in how he kind of grew up and what happened in his life. I do think it's definitely worth a watch. At number 2 is Top Gun Maverick, a movie that, again, I was not looking forward to it, was dreading going into it, and this was one of the few movies last year that I saw in theaters multiple times. This movie is a blast from beginning to end. The aerial scenes are just incredible. The performances are great, particularly from Tom Cruise, Miles Teller, Glenn Powell. This is not really an Oscar movie, but it's definitely a movie that I'm glad is nominated for Best Picture. This movie is great. I do love the emotional component of this movie. I think it handles the emotion in this movie better than a lot of other movies that have done. It's handled the emotions a lot better than a lot of other movies that came out this past year. It's really well done. I've watched it several times. I really enjoyed this movie. And at number 1 is Everything Everywhere All at Once. Now, I cannot stop talking about this movie. Out of all the Best Picture nominees, I think I've seen this one the most. So mainly that's my number 1. And it's kind of like Women Talking. It's pretty aptly named. It's literally everything. It's literally everywhere. And it's all happening at once. The performances are incredible, particularly Michelle Yeoh, Ke Huy Quan, Stephanie Hsu, Jamie Lee Curtis. James Hong is also really good in this movie. The visuals are incredible. The fight scenes are incredible. It's equal parts a comedy, action movie, family drama, romance story. It's really well done. It's really well executed. I cannot stop praising this movie. I love how they kind of talk about a lot of things in this movie, particularly generational trauma. Looking back this movie, every time I watch it, I always pick up on something new, and I always like that with movies. So, and Everything Everywhere All at Once is just an incredible movie from beginning to end. I named it as my favorite movie of last year, and I hope to see it win Best Picture this year. So, how would you rank this year's Best Picture nominees from your least favorite to your favorite? Comment down below, subscribe to the channel. This is Pat. Stay safe.